What's up? It's Andrea. Today, it's a new punchable face. Worf can't seem to remember that he's in charge of a small child, and we ask the question, you've got some nerve, Dr. Russell. Okay, so it's not a question, but still valid. Come nerd out with us.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Shereese, today we are talking Season 5, Episode 16, entitled Ethics. This episode was written by Sarah and Stuart Carno and directed by Chip Chalmers. After Worf is paralyzed in an accident, his only hope may be a visiting doctor with questionable ethics. Oof. What are your initial thoughts on this episode?
So what I wrote down, two things. First, what I wrote down is that I don't remember this one at all, other than the fact that I didn't really care for it. But I was totally open to rewatching it just to see if it changed my mind, because I have like zero memories of it other than Worf's back injury. And as you and I talked offline, I totally confused this with another episode coming up with Lwaxana and a creepy mud bath, because I just blend those two uncomfortable feelings into one episode.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is the title is really interesting, the title of Ethics, because from my memory, I was like, yeah, Worf wants to kill himself because his back is broken. So I guess it's unethical for Riker to do it. And then hearing your summary, and then after watching the episode, I was like, oh no, ethics was really about the doctor and a little bit about Riker maybe, but really the ethics was about the doctor.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy moly, I don't remember this storyline at all. And that was such a big deal. What about you? What were your initial thoughts?
I mean, my initial thoughts were sort of similar to yours. In my notes, I wrote, Worf breaks his back, assisted suicide episode, pass. I remember watching it once or twice when I was younger and just remembering just that. I was like, Worf either falls or something falls on him. He breaks his back. He'll never walk again. He wants to commit some ritual suicide. And I don't like this episode. And that was kind of my thought process going into it. And I'm really, really happy to say that my final thoughts are really different from
mine are too.
My initial thoughts. Cool.
Mine are too. I was like, but like I said, I didn't really remember it. And I always give it a skip because I confuse it with the other one, which I also always give a skip. I just combine those into uncomfortable feelings.
I tell you, that episode that we still have to review, I think it's coming up soon. That one where Lwaxana and Worf and Alexander are all in that super creepy mud bath on the holodeck. I
don't think Worf's in it. I think it's Lwaxana and Alexander, because she's always like, Alexander.
He is in it, but in the very end, it's like the end scene where they end up dragging him into
when
it.
He
and
agrees
he's like,
to it, yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, are we just supposed to sit here? Ugh, right? And that's my vibe the entire episode. I'm like, I want to give this such a pass. Like, if we could have one pass episode and we didn't use any for per season, yeah. Because season 1, we would have used all 7 of our passes.
Correct. And then we'd be like, dang it, we have no more passes left. But okay, so let's jump into the episode, because I think this one was actually really good and really interesting. And the whole doctor thing, which I have no memory of whatsoever.
Me neither. I was like, who the hell are you?
Yeah. Okay. And then also, this is a theme we've seen before. We have seen an assisted suicide episode before with Lwaxana, and that,
oh, that's right.
Right.
The man had half a life. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a really good episode. And we have seen an unethical scientist before. I think that was Dr. Stubbs and the egg, or the sentient something that attacked whatever.
Yes.
But so I think these themes can come back again and again, because there's just more to mine in those.
Yes, there's a lot of variations you can do in that.
Yeah. And so I really appreciate that, even though this is kind of 2 storylines that have been done, this feels fresh and new. So yay, team.
Yes. So exactly. And I love the way they did it. Let's just jump right in. Geordi and Worf visit a cargo bay because there's some leak that's been detected, and they're like, okay, let's go through all these big containers and see, what's going on. And they're kind of scanning around, and one of the containers, they're in these huge 50-gallon drums that look like plastic drums. One of the containers is leaking some sort of corrosive chemical, and so it's the container itself kind of starts melting because it's plastic, and it starts to warp. Now they're stacked several high, so the container on top of that one ends up getting tipped off balance, and it falls down on Worf and like completely takes him out, completely knocks him out. And they're like, oh my God, medical emergency, like right off the bat.
And Geordi runs over to see how Worf is doing, and he unnecessarily pulls the barrel back a few inches just to show how heavy the barrel is. Like, I don't know if you noticed this. He grabs it.
I didn't notice that at all.
He grabs it to pull it back, which is completely unnecessary because it's not on Worf or anything. But when he does, you hear this huge, I was just like, that was dumb. But the reason why they do it is you hear this like huge metal sound and the scraping sound, and he can barely move it at all to really demonstrate like this is a ridiculously heavy thing that fell on him, which I feel like was a really smart touch for the director to add that in, because I mean, we all know those are totally empty, like foam things and super light and totally harmless. So I really appreciate that they added in this, like, oh, this thing is so heavy. Like, this is really dangerous, which makes more sense in the next scene in sickbay when we find out how bad the damage really was. It wasn't that he was just knocked unconscious, but he was obliterated. Like we find out his spinal column was shattered. Like, what the F?
Yes.
And he has many vertebrae that have been crushed. So not like broken or snapped, but crushed and shattered. I was like, oh,
like little pieces. Yeah. So he comes to in sickbay and he's like, okay, he tries to stand up and he's like, doctor, I promise I'm not going to like leave sickbay without authorization. Like, you don't have to have a containment field over me. And she's like, Worf, there is no containment field. 7 of your vertebrae were crushed by the container and your spinal column was crushed as well. You're paralyzed and we can't fix that kind of damage. And that's when it cuts to opening credits. That's the bum, 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 which is one of the biggest ones we've ever had. But in this scene, I had a couple of observations. He's not hooked up to any machines at all. Like nothing. He looks like he's wearing like a karate gi, like he just took some jujitsu and like took a nap and woke up in sick bay. There isn't a monitor near him. Like there's nothing. I was like, nothing?
We don't need to stabilize his spine because there is no spine. It's all shattered.
Something, I guess.
We don't need a neck brace. Nope, guess not.
I guess not. Also, how did you get him out of his clothes and into new ones with like shattered everything?
Transporter magic?
Whatever. Maybe.
Can transporters change our clothes? Because that'd be really cool. Well, I don't know. Anyways, keep going.
Would be I feel like that'd be sort of a violation. Anyway, but Beverly, I just thought, wow, she really gave him that news straight. And I thought news like this needs to fall by degrees, where it's like, let's just try to get you stable right now. I need you to lie still. There's been some damage to your spine. We'll take a look. But if you're like, hey, Worf, bunch of shit went wrong in your spine, you'll never walk again. Like, it's like, dude, that's kind of a lot to hit somebody with. Like, the blow must fall by degrees, Beverly. And I feel like she should know that.
That's interesting because, I don't know how I feel about that statement, because if I was in Worf's position, I think I would want to know the truth sooner rather than later. I wouldn't want somebody to be I wouldn't want my doctor to be sugarcoating or false hope or anything. Other people all day long, but my doctor, no, like keep it straight. But I will say, that does seem on par with the experiences that I've had with doctors. There was a time where I was like really, really sick for months. I still to this day don't know what I had, but every single week I was going to a different set of specialists and doctors.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was awful. I lost my hearing for a time. I lost my voice for a time.
Oh,
and I was teaching at the
God.
time. So it was like, it was a lot. But I went to this one specialist and it was like an ear, nose, and throat person. And I had, as you probably might remember, Andrea, like everything in my ear, nose, and throat, everything is always swollen all the time. So he was like, I went for some scans and he was like, oh my gosh, everything is swollen. Like, how can you even breathe? Like the technician called him on a Saturday or Sunday after the scan and was like, get her in immediately. Like she probably can't breathe. And I was like, oh no, it's always like that. But when he called me in and he was like, you know what? I think it's cancer. And I was like, you haven't done a single test. Like, what are you even talking about? Yeah, I was like, you haven't run a blood test. You haven't taken a biopsy. Like, you think it's cancer based off of what exactly? And it was like, oh, because I've seen before something and symptoms, yada, yada. I was like, okay, what I'm going to need you to do is to run all of the tests. Hold on to judgment until you run the tests. Yeah. And he was like, okay, yeah, I've scheduled a biopsy and blah, blah, blah. And I just remember walking out and being like, who does that? Who tells somebody it's cancer without running a single test? Like, that is a really scary thing to say to somebody. And you should not say that without proof of some kind, even if you're like, it's cancer, but it's benign. But don't say that just out of like, you know what? I got to guess. Got a stomach ache? Probably cancer. Don't do that. Like, so I don't know.
Okay. I completely agree with you because that's just not following like conventional procedures. Like, let's check off some boxes before we get to
any kind of diagnosis. Okay? That's why I'm here. I don't know what's wrong. So just run all the tests.
I'm here because I can't figure it out. I'm coming to you to figure it out. Dumbass.
Don't guess. Like, yeah, and I told him that. I was like, please don't guess. Please run some tests.
I feel like doctors also need to try to remember what it's like to be a civilian, where we have a stomach ache, we've got something going on, we Google it, and the first thing Google tells us is cancer, right? So like we learn pretty quickly, don't Google your symptoms because it's always going to come up with the big C. We're already coming to you afraid that it might be that. And you go throwing around cancer like it could just be, when it turns out like you might have had a tiny unicorn crawl up into your nose and jump around and poke holes in it with its horn, and you just got to extract the unicorn and you'll be fine. Or whatever the F, right? Where it's like, it's not cancer. Don't tell me it could be without having like done any diagnostics yet. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, agreed.
Oh
so
my God.
All that to say is like, I want doctors to give it to me straight. So I appreciate how Beverly delivered this. And I want them to have some backup proof before they deliver it. And I feel like Beverly did. She had all the evidence to say like, we can't repair this damage. Now, I will say like immediately after, like the next scene or 2 scenes later, she's like, I think we can maybe do something. And I was like, okay, so then you should have started with that, honey. You should have started with, we're not sure how extensive the damage is. You're not going to be able to walk right now, but we are going to do everything we can. So I feel like she should have just been even more transparent to say like, we're going to do everything we can for you. I can't make any promises. And worst case scenario is you will never walk again, but I'm not going to give up until I've exhausted every resource at my disposal. Like that to me would have felt kinder and more true, because that's exactly what she's going to do.
Yes. We don't know how much time has passed from the container falling on him to him coming to in sickbay.
Yeah.
We can assume it's a couple of hours, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. So probably a couple of hours. Less than a day, I'd say.
Not enough time for her to have extensively run through everything she could possibly do.
I am not a doctor, but what I will tell you for certain is that when a body suffers that level of damage, not a lot can be foretold until like all the swelling and the inflammation, everything comes down. Like your body has such a rapid response to that level of physical trauma. It's like, it looks, 70 of your vertebrae are crushed. Your spinal column is crushed. This doesn't look good. However, there's still so much swelling. We kind of can't tell anything for certain yet until the swelling comes down. We need to give it like 2 to 3 days for the swelling to go down, whatever. But just to be like, hey, Worf, it's been like an hour. Good morning. I hope you had fun at jujitsu. You'll never walk again. It's like, okay, that to me was like, damn. Although I will say, nobody on the Enterprise wants to get it straight better than Worf. Like, he's like, just tell me how it is. But man,
maybe Data. The only other person who's like, just tell me like it is.
Yeah, because he won't have any reaction to it.
But please sugarcoat it for any other member of the crew. Yeah, nobody else wants to hear it like that.
For Picard,
for Troy, for anybody else,
nobody. Now they bring on a neurospecialist, Dr. Russell, who arrives to take a look at this case. And she's a huge fan of Beverly's. She's like, oh my God, I read your paper on like biosynthetic nanite, whatever. And she is just all sorts of fangirling over Beverly, which I was like, that's cool. That's cool. Like, we've got somebody else here who's a neurospecialist who's going to take a look at like what options we might be able to exercise in order to get Worf back on his feet to some extent.
Yeah, I was, sorry, were you going to say something else? Okay. Sorry. This is welcome to our show. This is your first time listening. Welcome. We interrupt each other because we're friends. So my first thought when Dr. Russell, before she even beamed on, just when they said, we're finding a neural specialist, we're bringing them on board. And before she materialized, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this would be the perfect moment to bring back Pulaski. Like,
I thought the same thing.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this would be great because this could finally give us closure, because she totally disappeared at the end of season 2 with no rhyme or reason. When Beverly left the show, they were like, oh, she went back to Starfleet to be head of medical whatever. And and they gave us some kind of explanation where we're like, okay, I guess. But then when season 3 started, it was just like, Beverly's back, do. And we never hear about Pulaski
body swap. It's like Darren from Bewitched
again.
all over again. You're like, no, okay.
It's 100% like that. And it was like, well, we could have just had she went back to Starfleet. Like, we could have had just one sentence, but I thought this would have been the perfect moment to bring her back and be like, of course she's a neural specialist, and we could have gotten some closure and see where she's at now and all this stuff. However, this was my thought at the beginning of the episode. However, by the time we get to the end of the episode,
yes,
I am like,
I'm glad it wasn't
so
Pulaski.
glad they didn't pick Pulaski, because she would have never behaved in a billion years the way Dr. Russell is behaving.
Not even close. Not even close.
And Worf was her best friend on the ship. So ugh.
100%.
Something we find out from their conversation as she's fangirling and talking to Beverly is that Klingons don't have a ton of research on this particular type of damage, because they usually let the patients die in this condition. They just like let them die or kill them, let them kill themselves. So there's like almost no research done on it. So they really are starting from scratch. It's pretty much a blank slate for the two of them to try to figure out if anything at all could be done for Worf. And Beverly's feeling pretty confident that there cannot be anything. Dr. Russell, though, is a fresh face. She's excited about it, and she tells Beverly right off the bat, because Beverly's like, "Come meet Worf. You'll get to know him. He's a little gruff, but you'll get to like him later." And she was just like, "Nah, I don't ever want to meet him. Like, I need to keep a professional distance from the patient so I can focus on the work and give you an unbiased opinion." And I thought that was extremely professional and good that she set that boundary at the beginning.
Yes.
And again, I had no idea that this doctor was going to turn the direction that she turned in. So I'm feeling like good at this point. I'm like, okay, cool. We got a specialist. Like,
Awesome. Yeah, it is actually really nice too. And it's more like real medicine, where your ear, nose, and throat guy is also not going to be doing the orthopedic exam or whatever. Exactly. So Riker comes to visit Worf in sickbay, and at this point they do have him hooked up to some machines and he's being monitored by some machines. But did they have to pull those machines from Captain Kirk's Enterprise? Because oh my God, it was like beep boop boop beep 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 boop, and it was like big clunky television screens and shit. I was like, where's our really nice sleek LCARS panels? Where's like the blue and red jars when we need them? Like, this was like a
something bubbling in the back
with a bunch of buttons that just lit up. It was like so 1960s. I was like, where are you repurposing this from? Did they find this in the back of the props house and be like, yeah, let's just blow the dust off of it and throw it in the scene? I mean, it was so bad.
I didn't even notice. I did not even know. Here's why I didn't notice, I think, is because I was focused on the purple pajamas, because I was still kind of like, what's the deal with it? I was still stuck on that. And then when
he had so many wardrobe changes. I'm like, I thought you're just lying there. Like, you're probably good in what you're wearing, I guess. Anyway, whatever.
They don't do gowns, I guess. They do cool purple pajamas. They do purple geese. Okay. Sure. Future. Space.
Jordy's like, I need something comfy to lie down in. Can I borrow?
He sure does. He sure does. Since we know he sleeps in his uniform.
And shoes.
What I noticed was that Riker said, "Are you sick of the sickbay food yet?" And I was just thought to myself, how is it different from any other food on the ship? Isn't that the replicator right behind you? And then I was like, okay, but maybe in sickbay
I guess
they give
it's just kind of nice to know
food. So for medical, sure,
yeah, like chicken broth and like polenta
crackers
or something, like some grits or something. Yeah, just some basic like toast and butter or something. Which, by the way,
on the Enterprise, didn't we have that question before?
Well, they sure have phasers that can toast things, so I don't see why not.
That's true.
Anyway, Worf is like, so I'm not gonna get better because I want to perform the Het-Ba ceremony, which is ritual suicide. And Worf wants to end his life the way that he lived it, with dignity and honor. And he's like, Commander, I'm going to ask you to assist me in performing the Het-Ba. And Riker was like, no, I can't help you.
How dare you?
Yeah, I can't
outraged.
Help you. Yes, he really was. Now, actually, there's an outtake where they were arguing back and forth, and Riker like got all up in Worf's face about it, but the writers were like, let's cut that because that was like too much. It's like the man just asked him to help him end his life, and he's lying there paralyzed. So like
getting in his face is maybe
a smidge much. Yeah. But Riker is like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to do this. But now we know what like Worf's intention is. He's like, I'm not interested in doing this physical therapy and any of the stuff that they're going to, whatever Dr. Crusher and Dr. Russell are going to come to me with, It's going to be a no, because
Mm-hmm.
it's already a no. Dr. Russell and Dr. Crusher don't know that, though. And did you notice as they're discussing like Klingon body differences from humanoid bodies, there's this super cool, like augmented reality version of his spine,
Mm-hmm.
like a holographic thing. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. And I noticed that the little platform that it's spinning around on is also like lit up on the top of its little platform, like a reddy orangey light. So obviously they put in the holographic spine like in post-production, but they had the idea that they had a little platform, like a little column that like lit up. And then when Dr. Russell hit the platform, the light turned off and then the augmented reality spine went away. I was like, those are the details right there that sets and props did that really create a world, like a whole universe. I just, something as small as that, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool.
That was spectacular. I was like, wow, they are looking at this 3D rendering of this Klingon spine, which is super duper long and very, very cool. And it had some little red organ at the bottom that looked like a second brain or something. And I was like, ooh, what's that? Like, it was just very, very cool. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about years and years ago, I love crime dramas, and I watched all of the CSIs, like all of them. Actually, that's not true. The New Orleans one, I was like, but that was after like a solid 25 years of CSI shows. It was like, okay, I think we're good now. But but in at one point this technology was developed, which I'm sure is real because it came up on the show, where they could do virtual autopsies. So they have this big thing that scans the whole body, and then it recreates a 3D representation of the body that you can manipulate, just like it's visual, and it's not really a hologram per se, but it pretty much looks like a 3D rendering on a computer of a body. And you can see damage to bones and damage to organs and all kinds of stuff. And it was so cool. And as you're talking, I'm like, hey, they probably got that idea from this episode. Like this technology that came about 15 years later or 20 years later, that's now a reality. But even in this episode, from this really old, totally pretend made up idea, it is still so cool and definitely catches my imagination. I think it's amazing.
Isn't that so cool? It still stands up today. It still looks amazing.
Yes, 100%.
In Ultra HD, it looks amazing.
And not everything does. So again, yay team. Next, Dr. Russell says, okay, I've got an idea. And she points out this device that she is creating, working on, invented, that is basically like a 3D printer, but for organs.
That's what I wrote.
I amazing.
Wrote a 3D print of a living spine. And
amazing.
In the show, it's called Genetronic Replicator, which I was like, all right, the name checks out. It sounds cool. But I wrote the 3D printed spine. Yeah.
Right. Which they couldn't have called it because 3D printers did not exist in 1992.
Yes, it wasn't a thing.
So again, it's like, man, you guys are so before your times. Like that. This is some amazing, like predictive work right here.
Which, by the way, scientists are working now to make like 3D printed organs, which I think is super cool. So it's like, yeah, they were like 35 years ahead of their time, which is unbelievably
100%,
cool.
100%. And organ cloning and stuff like that was happening back when I was still in college. So like, that's definitely a thing. So this technology is completely legit. Like sometimes there's stuff in the show where you're like, ooh, they did not talk to a scientist before doing that. But then other times it's like this, where you're like, this is legit. All of this checks out. This can totally 100% be a thing and totally work. Such a cool idea. I was really excited about it. Beverly was really excited about it. And then she's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were testing this in, clinical trials. How many patients has it worked on so far? This is really great.
She's like, come to find out, none so far.
She has not tested this on a single, this is a theory. It's a cool idea she has for someday. And she's like, hey, this is the perfect opportunity. Let's try it on Worf. The holographic simulations that I run have a 37% success rate, which by the way, is like a F minus. Like, and then I love how Beverly's like, wow, even a hologram would balk at that. Like even a hologram would be like, no, I'm good. I'm totally good with that procedure.
Yeah. I have a 2 out of 3 chance of dying in this procedure. Is there a plan B you guys maybe have that we can try out first? Like a something? That should be like plan Z for zebra. Like
it's crazy.
Way down the line.
It's crazy. Yes. Like it's a cool idea and it's not anywhere near ready. Like nowhere near.
Not even
close.
And
Beverly points out, in order to even do this, let's pretend like this isn't your first guinea pig patient. In order to do this, we have to completely remove Worf's current spine and then put in this newly synthesized spine. And I mean, Dr. Russell has a lot of good points of like, well, trying to rebuild a bunch of shattered bones is pointless. Like that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
They're shattered. They're everywhere. That's not gonna happen. Let's just make a new whole one that works all together. I mean, that all makes sense. It's just the fact that it's completely untested. So Beverly's like, we'd have to completely remove his spine, and if anything goes wrong, we're not going to be able to put it back because we don't know enough about Klingon anatomy.
Yes.
So he will 100% die. Like if this procedure goes wrong, he will die. It's not like we can be like, okay, that leg replacement didn't work. Let's just put back in the old bone or something like that. It's not like that.
Let's just cinch it off and see what plan B could be. Yeah, it's like, this is the plan. You're removing the patient's spine, right? Like there is nothing else there if you don't have it. Something that they do talk about though, is that the Klingon body has a ton of redundancies, multiples of most major organs. And so it's like, he doesn't have a spinal redundancy though. Like this is it. His spinal column is
a bajillion vertebrae, but they're all smashed. So like
all of them are in one column. Yeah. Oof. And Dr. Crusher's like, you're still in the most preliminary stages of research. We're going to have to do more like conventional stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a good call, Bev. That's a really good call. To be like, you know what? That sounds cool. And you're about 20 years away from implementing like clinical trials of this. Like this is not a thing. Now our B plot surfaces though. The USS Denver has struck a leftover Cardassian gravitronic mine from like the Cardassian Federation War that ended like 1 billion years ago. And a bunch of people need medical help. And so they need the Enterprise to like go give like urgent medical attention and like triage, everybody. So off they go. And Riker comes to Picard to discuss Worf's request. And I got to tell you, I understand completely why Worf feels this way, but I think Picard knows his crew so well. He's like, Riker, you and I could learn to live with a disability like this, maybe, but Worf cannot. He's asking you as a trusted friend. And if he didn't know he could count on you, he never would have asked. And I think that Riker wanted somebody to agree with him and be like, I can't believe he asked that. I know that's too much, right? That's ridiculous. Yeah,
definitely
you're right.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, but Picard is like, it's just two different cultures. He would have to. He says something later on to Beverly where it's something along the lines of like, he would have to undo a lifetime of like
values and beliefs.
Values and beliefs and all of this. And like, he's not going to do that. He's just not going to.
Would any of us? No. That's what the lifetime of beliefs is for.
Yes.
That's what it's for.
To inform our decisions going forward, especially
100%. Yes.
Especially the ones that are like big decisions that you shouldn't have to like think about too much. It's just instinctual. Like, you know what to do. Right.
I love this conversation with Riker and Picard so much. I really appreciated Picard's ability in this episode and also in next week's episode. The same thing came up again, but I really appreciate Picard's ability to respect other cultures.
Yes.
They don't align with his values.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
I really appreciate Picard's ability to respect other cultures, even if it doesn't align with his values, which happens all the time. I mean, they're in space. Of course, they're going to come along across a lot of species that don't think exactly the same way that Earthlings think and believe and value and everything else. And especially in this case where it's Worf's personal decision and he's a member of the crew. So it's not like some alien race they'd come upon and they're going to zoom off into the sunset and never see them again. Like as you said, Picard knows Worf really well. They know the Klingon culture really well. And he's like, this is important to Worf and we can't take this decision away from him. Like this is his decision one way or the other. He's asking you to be a part of it. But, and he also says, and I can't tell you what to do here. It's up to you. And that's when Riker's just like, duh, because he really wants someone
on you at all.
Yeah, he really wants someone to tell him you don't have to do this, and it's crazy, and agree with him and everything that you said. But I really love this conversation.
I did too. I really, really think that it speaks so well to the characters as we know them and love them. Riker is, Mr. Do the right thing at all times, kind of, but like he's very much like, I lead with my heart and that's where I go. And Picard is the perfect counterpart for him because he leads with his head. Yeah. He values his heart. He doesn't silence his heart, but he ends up weighing like he's a total Ravenclaw. Like he weighs like what the right thing is and the wrong thing is. And it's not always the thing that incenses us and gets us upset, Now, I just thought that was a great conversation. Alexander is on the ship. We've kind of forgotten about him, to be honest, but he's on the ship. And like, here's his
I didn't
dad.
forget about him. That was my first thought when Worf was like, Riker, I want you to help me with this ceremony. I was like, wait a minute. Are you going to say goodbye to your son who is still on the ship supposedly right now in his quarters by himself?
Hello? See, that was the thing.
Hello?
He had so much airtime a few weeks ago that I was like, okay, well, we haven't seen Alexander for a while, so I guess, okay, whatever. I had totally forgotten about him. Mm-hmm. But here he is freaking out because he's not able to see his dad. You know how I hate the little kid having a tantrum and screaming vibe, but I 100% understand why he was so freaked out. Mm-hmm. I'd be panicking as well.
Yep. Here's yelling and screaming at Troy like she's the bad guy because that's the only thing he has in front of him to yell and scream at.
Well, she's the one who says, you know, you can't go see him. And it's not her choice. It's Worf's choice to be like, I don't want him to see me like this. And Alexander is so terrified that he'll lose his father. And like, hasn't he lost enough? Like,
he really has. He really has.
Troy is magnificent in this episode. And here's why. Mm-hmm. Yes, she is perfection. Here's why. Because she is kind and considerate with Alexander. And Alexander's like, you're the problem. You're not the one letting me see him. Why? This is your fault. And she's like, I think you know that that's not true. And then she like holds him and hugs him when he like kind of runs out of steam. And then she goes to Worf and she's like, Alexander is scared and worried and wants to see his father. And Worf is like, no, it's not okay. I don't want him to see me like this. My honor. And she says, maybe it's time you stop laying here worrying about your honor and start worrying about someone else like your son. And she walks out and I was like, oh,
snaps. Oh. And I really feel like Troy's the only one who could have said that too. Like no one else would have thought to say that and no one else has that relationship to say that. Yeah.
Absolutely right. She fucking killed it. She is exactly the kind of communicator I wish to be one day.
Yeah.
Where I can say something really powerful one time and quietly, and it still has the same impact as if I were, or more impact, as if I were repeating myself over and over again and saying it really loudly because I'm like trying to get my point across, which is what I do when I get upset. I raise my voice and I like repeat myself until I feel like the other person is understanding what I'm saying. But she was not even worried about him understanding. She's like, here's this truth bomb. Goodbye. And I was like, God, you are so good. She's like the MVP of the whole season.
She really is. She really is. I mean, thank God that she stayed on the season or on the show all the way through the end, because you and I have mentioned this before. Season 1, Troy was just useless.
Terrible.
Useless. Season 5, Troy is like the most valuable person on the ship. Like she's so clutch. And this episode is no exception. I completely agree with you. And you kind of like, I kind of hoped that would really sink in and Worf would be like, well, let me think twice about it. But it doesn't work at all. He's just like, whatever, on to what I was doing. At that moment, Dr. Russell comes in with Beverly and they're like, all right, we think we've got a solution. And my first thought was like, okay, well, if they think they have a solution, Beverly, you were too quick to say there are no solutions because you have one now. So maybe you should have.
That's why you got to give it a couple of days.
Should have
held off swelling to come down.
2-3 days. You know? Like, yeah. But anyways, she goes, okay, here's the solution we have. We can put implants throughout your body that react to your brain impulses, to what you're thinking, that will send a signal down to your legs to make them move.
Yeah,
and I thought that is the coolest thing ever. That's a super cool idea. And then not only was that idea
so cool, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, not only was that a very cool, totally, again, legit science, totally legit idea. Then on top of that, they have these cool braces to put on the outside where they can practice this before they put any implants inside the body. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Like pre-implants. It's like, we're going to do these external ones that we can just strap on you so you can kind of start getting a feel for this. And then if it's successful, we'll go on with the surgery.
The full actual surgery. I just thought this is
more
cool.
of this world building thing where this is why season 5 is where it's at, which is incredible. It's in an incredible place because of this, because they've taken the time to world build so much that their medical suggestions make perfect sense with the freaking technology that exists at the time that doesn't even exist in the real world. And yet here it is making perfect sense. Like you and I are not doctors, but even as scientists, it's like, yep, that makes perfect sense.
Yep,
You would
that
have
tracks.
a middleman stimulator that would read like the brain impulse and send an electrical impulse to the muscle to make it twitch. All of our muscle movement, all of it in our body is electrical impulses.
Sent from our
That's what it
brain
is.
through our
It comes from
spine.
our brain. It's yep, that's what it is. So I love, and the little LCARS panel, they're back from like the TOS panels days. They've got the LCARS panels and they show kind of the outline of Worf's body, and they're like, here's where all of the implants would be. And they're kind of like in his brain, along his spine, down his arms, and down his legs and his torso. It's like, yep,
That's
all
exactly
of this
where they
makes
should
sense.
go.
And
Yep.
this is exactly where to go. Now, Worf is not having any of this.
Not even
because
a
they
little
said,
bit.
not even a little. And they say, it will take some physical therapy and training to relearn how to walk, which, by the way, we all walk, right? We do it without thinking. We learned it as babies. But if you ever have watched videos or if you've ever seen somebody who's had like an accident or a veteran with some explosives or something who's had to relearn how to walk, it is an incredibly difficult process. I haven't had to go through it myself, thank God, and knock on wood, I never will have to. But watching videos of people learning how to walk as adults it's just so demoralizing. It's because you have to keep track of like 210 muscles at once or some ridiculous number. It's like it's just really hard to train your body to do that. So they're like, it's gonna take a ton of work, but you could get 60 to 70% of your capacity back. And he's like, 60 to 70. No, I'm not.
Yeah,
doing
it's
this.
a lot of hard work. It's going to take a long time, and it won't be 100% effective, even if it does work. There are like almost no benefits to this as they're explaining it to him from his worldview. And he mentions a lot of things. He's like, I will not be lurching around the ship, an object of pity and ridicule. And it's like
a Klingon robot.
Yeah. Like he doesn't want to see, like when I think of somebody who's limping for whatever reasons, they have a cane or whatever. It's just like, whatever, they're limping. Like, it's not even I don't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
But to think of it from the perspective of the person who's limping, to be like, oh, you see me as I'm lurching around like some kind of bumbling, person or whatever. I'm like, oh, I do see how that could affect your self-confidence, especially if you're a warrior and all this stuff. And he said to Riker, he was like, when a warrior cannot stand to face battle, then his life is over as a warrior. He's no longer a warrior. And it was like, oh, wow. Like if you can't just like walk normally, then your life is over because you can't have this persona. And yet, to your point, my stepfather had a really bad stroke a few years ago and had to relearn all the stuff. And he's still relearning all the stuff. And that's walking, talking, all the stuff. And, he gets frustrated sometimes. And my mom, who graciously takes care of him, sometimes she'll tell me like, he doesn't want to do his physical therapy or whatever. He's like really bummed and stuff like that. And it's like, if you don't do that, guess what? You don't get better. Like you have to do the work, and it's not fun, and it's going to take a long time. But as she was telling me where he was, I just kind of put myself in his shoes. And thankfully, I've never been in that situation either. And I hopefully never will be, where I lose the mobility of my limbs or I lose my ability to speak and have to relearn it. But just putting myself in his shoes, I would be extremely frustrated. If I could, like, walking aside, if I could not speak, if I could not clearly communicate, that would be, to me, like Worf no longer being a warrior.
Yes.
Like that would be the equivalent, where I'd be like, what's the point? Like, if I can't communicate clearly, which is like one of my most important things in life.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. If I didn't have that, I don't even know. Like, I would not be able to deal with that as easily as I would be not being able to walk. Cause I'd be like, oh, there's wheelchairs, there's ramps, but like, you can't talk, or people can't understand you, or you're slurring every word and no one knows what you're saying. And like, you can't write because you've lost the ability to move your hands. So you can't type or write or talk. Like, oh my gosh, that sounds like hell to me.
It reminds me of a story I was actually reading. I love Greek mythology, and I was reading the story of Cassandra, who was one of the princesses of Troy. And she was visited by the god Apollo, and he wanted to take her to his bed, as most gods did, in these kinds of stories. And she refused him a bunch of times. And so he was like, what do you mean? I'm Apollo. Like, you're immortal. Like, you don't refuse me. So she finally says, okay, fine. You can take me to your bed, but I want to be able to see the future. And he's like, okay. And he takes her to his bed and has his way with her. And in the end, she's like, well, what about my like ability to see the future? He's like, oh, that's right. And he basically like gives her this gift to see the future. And it is the worst thing that ever happens to her because he does it in a way where she can see the future, but she can only see the horrible things that are coming in the future. And that's all she can see. That's all she can see. So she can only see the horrors in somebody's future. Like she'll look at me and see the horrors in my future, or you, or the, and he took away her ability to communicate. So she can't even warn these people that these things are going to happen. So she just ends up like, essentially like nobody believes her or can understand what she's saying. And so she ends up just giving up communicating altogether and like just becoming like an empty shell of a person who dies like very alone because
Apollo was a super dick in that. Oh my gosh.
Why
they all
that? Were. All of those gods were. Yeah. See, there's actually a really great book.
Unnecessarily cruel. My goodness.
Oh my God. Oh yeah, no. That's totally what it is. Like, there's actually this great book I've been reading called 1,000 Ships. And it's actually stories of like the Trojan War, but of all the women, because all the men's tales have been told, Ajax and Astyanax and, all of the heroes of the Greek and Trojan conflict. But like the women are usually written as either like, you're like a lustful creature or some pitiful weeping willow who falls to pieces. And usually it was the women like that held shit down, so like this woman actually was like, I'm gonna write all the women's stories, and this is one of them. And I was like, dear God, like that. I was thinking about that because communication for me is like it's like one of our superpowers, and it's how we live our lives. And if we're not being understood, oh my God, I'd be like,
extremely frustrating.
Okay, Riker, pull the plug, buddy. Like,
and you wouldn't even be able to communicate that, right? Because we couldn't communicate. Like,
oh my God, that's like you're like trapped in a hell of like, my God, yeah, you're trapped in hell.
So that would be my equivalent of what Worf's going through. But for Worf, it's just, and this is why Riker's so upset, and this is why Beverly is also like, no, you're not going to kill yourself, is because they're like, so what if you can't walk? You can still live a long, healthy life, which is true, but emotionally. He would not live a long and healthy life. He would be dead
also
inside.
think about who Worf is in his job. He has a very, very physically demanding job.
Yes.
Okay.
Even if chief of security, who can't walk around.
Even if you take away the snarky comments I always make about the Worf effect and him getting his ass beaten left and right, right? Like, even if he did his job effectively, he still has to throw some muscle around. Okay,
that's true. And he has to like backhand people from time to time, and
he does. He's got to.
He wouldn't be able to do
with
that.
The butt of his palm on their nose and break their noses, like
Klingon punch them.
Yes, he has to do the Klingon punch. If he maybe worked at like a science station and was seated most of the time, he could get a wheelchair and he could still use his brain. But he uses his body for his job. So Dr. Russell sees the opportunity, and she's like, "Okay, well, there is this other option. I can 3D print you a spine." And you could get all your functionality back.
And you will get 100% of your functionality back.
Dr. Crusher is so pissed. She's like, can I see you in the hallway for a minute? And is so freaking pissed. And I got to say, I don't think what Dr. Russell did was right. However, knowing that Worf is like, I'm going to kill myself.
What's the difference?
What is the difference? So
there's no difference. I agree with you. And I feel like that's a part, and maybe this part was said off screen, so that's why we didn't see it. But that was the part that stuck with me, is I wanted to hear her say, after she was like, if it's successful, it will restore 100% of your functionality. I also wanted her to say, she did say it's highly experimental, but I also wanted her to say, just so you know, it has never been tried before in a single human. And in all the simulations I've run, it only has a 37% success rate. So it is extremely dangerous and extremely likely that it will kill you. However, on the slim possibility that it's successful, you will regain 100% of your functionality. So this is an alternative to the ceremony you're considering. Like, I wanted all of that. And all I heard was like, it's going to be 100% successful.
She sounded like, I've got a miracle cure for you, right? And here comes Dr. Crusher being like, we have this other thing that we could do, and it's going to be really hard work, and you're only going to get 60 to 70% back of your capacity. Like, it's like you're trying to get me to drink sewage water, and here this person comes with like, I've got like Mountain Dew or whatever. And you're like, oh, wow, cool, right?
But there's a 63% chance it'll kill you. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. That's what Dr. Russell needed to say. I think, when Beverly pulls her into the hallway to be like, what the F, Dr. Russell? Dr. Russell says he'd rather die than live with the implants. I'm giving him a better option than suicide. And I thought, she's not wrong. She's not wrong. But I also think Dr. Crusher is not wrong. Like, she argues that Dr. Russell is using the desperation of a patient to give him this like miracle cure to cling to when like there's absolutely no guarantee it's going to work. There's actually a greater guarantee that it won't work. So I wanted to ask you, what would you do as a doctor? And if we could see the rationale between both of these doctors, who do you think is like more right?
I mean, I'll say what I just said. That's a great question. And I'll say what I said just a moment ago. I just want I think Dr. Russell should have offered that solution to Worf and been fully transparent with every single thing about it so he could make an informed decision. I do not think it was ethical of her to pose it as, hey, I've got this great idea and it'll be 100% effective, period. That was a bald-faced lie. Like, that was just a lie. I think it was acceptable for her to pose her option, but laying out everything on the table and saying, hey, you know, you were going to kill yourself anyway. You know, she wouldn't say it like that, right? Because she's a doctor, but you know, like this is an alternative that may still have the same exact effect. You may still die from this procedure. There's a great chance of it, but there's a slim chance of success. Like I would have been completely okay with that. But the way she did it felt really sneaky and really smarmy. It felt like she lied to him on purpose. It felt like she could care less about his life or the quality of his life, and that she just wants to further her own research for her own notoriety. And that to me feels really slimy.
Yeah.
So like, to answer your question, I think she should have offered it, but with more transparency. Yeah. And I think it's her motives that are the problem, not the procedure. It's her motives and the way she goes about serving her own needs, I think is really, really gross.
I agree. I totally agree. Now, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. This B plot kind of comes back and it actually ends up tying in quite nicely with the A plot. And it is a nice B plot. It's just a bite-sized sort of like, here's other shit that's going on with the Enterprise, but also ties into this main story. We're in the cargo bay. The colonists have arrived that were hit by the mine. They're triaging. And, you know, people are all kinds of burnt up and cut up and hurting. And it looks like a battlefield hospital.
Most colorful scene I've ever seen. Did you notice that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. People are wearing all sorts of different colors. And there's like burns and contusions of all different colors as well. Yeah, they really amped up those hyper colors.
This scene of like the injured people, I think the whole scene was probably like 3 minutes long altogether. And just the panning around of the pain was probably 30 seconds. But man, did it pack a punch. Like you said, there's burns and contusions. And the woman that Dr. Crusher was over had this broken leg. And you could see like her leg was at this weird angle and like smashed in the middle. And like her hands are sticking out and there's like burns on people's faces. I was like, wow, like just for this 30-second pan, the attention to detail was spectacular.
Yes, they really went for it. They really went for it. Yeah. The coordinators of this entire scene did a beautiful job. Now, Dr. Russell starts tricordering a dead body. And it comes to light that instead of using conventional treatments that would have saved his life, she used another theoretical procedure that she's been working on. And he didn't survive. And Beverly was like, I'm sorry, you did what? Like, the first way would have saved his life. And Dr. Russell was like, well, this would have been a faster way to save his life. But turns out it killed him.
Yeah, she's like, he was so sick that the conventional methods probably weren't going to work at all. So it was worth trying my theoretical, methods so that at least it could do something. And Beverly's just like, but you didn't even try. You didn't even try. Even if that's true, that the traditional medicines would not have worked because he was so far gone. The problem is you didn't even try the things we all know that are tried and true that could work. You didn't even bother. You skipped straight to some, not even in clinical trials phase, special concoction potion you had in your back pocket. And he died.
Yes. And this is what actually really kills me about Dr. Russell. And the smarminess is the word that you just used. And it's so perfect. Dr. Russell says, well, don't worry. His life wasn't lost in vain. I was able to gather tons of data on what happened. It's like,
right. Because that's what Beverly was worried about. She was worried about if you got enough data.
Did you get enough data points? It was just so cold.
Callous and just
so
disgusting.
Cold and callous. And Dr. Russell was like, well, the data that I gathered, though, will continue to build like my hypothesis so that at some point this could save thousands. It's like, and I love that Beverly is saying the thing that we were thinking. It's like, I doubt that's going to be much solace to like his family members. That this person could be living right now and isn't because you wanted to test a freaking hypothesis. Like, and that's when she's like, wait a minute, this is exactly what you're trying to do with Worf. Like, it's all about furthering your research. And she straight up relieves Dr. Russell of duty. I was like, yes,
move.
Thank
and that's
you.
Exactly what needed to happen right there. She's just like,
you.
Goodbye. Because I mean, how many other corpses are laying in the cargo bay right now because of her? And you know what? It's so funny because earlier, after they had their argument in the hallway, Picard comm badged to Beverly and was like, okay, the colonists are here. Are we ready? And Beverly's like, yes, we're all ready. All the teams are set up. Triage is ready. And Dr. Russell goes, hey, could you use a hand? And Beverly's like, yeah, I could. And I just thought, wow, that's so professional. Like, even though they're like kind of beefing, personally, they're still professional and they're still the patient comes first. And then after she pulls this nonsense, I was like, oh my gosh, you are literally doing more harm than good. And you're a freaking doctor, and we need all the doctors we can get in this scenario.
You're going against the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm.
You're doing harm left and right for research purposes.
In the name of furthering your name as a researcher.
And you could tell, just like you said, she's so cold and callous. There was not a hint of remorse or regret. She has no emotions.
Like, don't worry, we got data. It's like, what? I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Beverly's like, no more medical procedures on board my ship. Goodbye. No, and I was like, snaps. No. Yes.
Go spend some time on the holodeck. Yeah. Get out.
No,
Goodbye.
Just go get on a shuttle and go somewhere else. Because you don't need to be anywhere near anyone who's hurt ever again.
No, not at all. So Picard actually comes to visit Beverly and he's like, I'm on my way to come visit Worf. And I was like, why has it taken the captain like 5 days to visit his chief of security?
I'm sure he's visited before, but this is like, I think so. I think this is him visiting, telling Beverly what he's going to do because he wanted to talk to Beverly. You know what I mean?
See, because we haven't seen him visit Worf, I assumed this was the first time he was visiting. And I was like, come on, Picard. He's like one of the people you work with all the time. And he's about to lose his whole life one way or another. And you've taken, 5 days to walk down to the sick bay. Anyway. Okay, but you know what? I'll go with that because that sounds better. And Picard tells Beverly, like, I know that this is not what you want to hear, but maybe we should do the 3D printed spine because Worf is not going to go with the implants option. He's not going to do it. And he's going to kill himself as soon as you let him out of your sight. And she's like, well, then I won't let him out of my sight. It's like, okay, how's that going to work? A month? A year, a decade? And she's like, however long I have to. It's like, that's gonna work though.
That's false. No. Plus, how miserable would you be to see him deteriorate day after day after day? Kind of reminds me of that movie $1 Million Baby. If you saw that movie.
Yes!
And if you haven't seen that movie and you're listening, I won't spoil it, but the end is very intense and there was definitely a lot of tears on my part. And
agreed, me too.
Kind of reminds me, and this scene reminded me of that movie a lot in the sense that you just see someone feeling really hopeless. Like you would see someone feeling really hopeless.
Yes.
And even if Beverly had her way and could keep him contained forever, who he is as a person would change and would wither away and would die. And that would be an awful thing to witness.
Yeah, that's not, I love how well Picard knows his crew, especially his senior staff. It's like, he's not going to go for this.
Yeah.
Now, here's a scene that I was like, this is just weird. Riker comes in with a Klingon robe in hand and the dagger in hand to do the ritual suicide ceremony.
Such a cool
dagger. And he's like, it is a cool dagger. And I was like, that looks like a pain in the ass to clean because it's got barbs that go both directions. And I was like, ouch.
You just wipe it off on your sleeve. Apparently. You don't really clean it.
You're not wrong. You just sort of wipe it on your pant leg and keep it moving.
Wipe it. You clean it by stabbing it into other enemies. And it just kind of, that's all the cleaning it gets.
I will say, as a like weapon of war, it will inflict maximum damage because the barbs on it go both ways. So if you go in and out, it's going to fuck shit up.
And you twist it. Oof.
Okay, so Riker comes in hot and he's got the robes in hand, he's got the dagger in hand, and he's like, I'm not gonna do it. And I was like,
did you think he was when he first came?
Of course not. Of course I didn't. But I was like, why would you bring in the robe and dagger? To me, it's like showing up to a Halloween party in a costume with a gift in hand and being like, I'm not gonna come to your party and like leave. It's like, then why did you? Yeah. Okay, this was a little bit dramatic, Riker. He's like, find somebody else to do your dirty work. I was like, all right. Okay, Riker. I feel like you're mad that Worf made the request and you're even more mad that Picard did not corroborate your anger. So now you're just like on a fucking tantrum.
Yeah, I feel like
where'd you get the rope from, dude?
Troy's approach was much better than Riker's approach.
Yeah.
I have to say. But
I agree.
Riker plays the same card of like playing on Alexander's sympathy, which I think is important because again, Worf, you have a freaking kid. Like, I know you don't like to think about him, but he's yours and he's your responsibility. So like, you have to consider him in your choices, especially as it affects you being alive to take care of him because he's like 6. It's not like he's 23 or something and you've like done your job and he's off on Klingon doing whatever. Like he very much needs you.
Worf, Copernicus called and you are not the center of the universe. Okay. Like, okay. You have a child who is on board the ship. And when he came to see him once, Worf was trying out those little strap implant
braces,
the like braces, and he fell down and he screamed at Alexander to leave him. And like the poor kid like ran off traumatized. It's like, you are the injured party, but your actions are injuring others, and that's not cool.
Yeah. And especially your little one, like your kid who needs you. This isn't
God.
It's one thing if it's like your colleagues or whatever, they're other adults, they can maybe understand. Alexander cannot understand what's going on. He's not supposed to. I completely agree with what you said at the beginning. He's lost enough. He's lost enough. He's not only a little child that makes him not have the tools to like, deal with stuff like this, but he's also an incredibly damaged child. So it's like you have to take even greater pains to like ensure stability for him, right? To try to like undo some of that trauma. But Riker huffs off all dramatic, but one of the things he says is, I can't even do the ceremony because it's supposed to go to a son. And Worf is like, that's not possible. He's like, not possible is not right. Like, he can do it. You just don't want to put him through it. So you made me do it. So I'm not doing it. And he like storms off. And I was like, when he leaves the knife as he storms off. And I was like,
I was like,
Riker, did you might forget something back here?
Don't leave the loaded weapon in the room with 100%, the suicidal person.
Because that's how the suicide was supposed to go. He was supposed to stab himself and then pull it out of his own chest or something. And then Riker was supposed to like wipe it off on his sleeve or something. In any case, like Worf was the one who was going to use the knife. So I felt like I agree.
Don't leave it right on his chest where he could just be like, and just do it. Like, come on.
Exactly.
Come on.
I agree with you. I don't know why Riker came in hot like that and actually brought the knife. That seemed counterintuitive to his purpose of, I'm not going to be a part of this. That was like, you're very much part of this now.
That was showing up to the Halloween party 100%. In costume and saying, I'm not going to be part of this. Well, apparently Riker's histrionics works though, because Worf does call Alexander to speak to him and tells him that he's chosen to break with tradition and he's not going to take his life. He's going to try the 3D printed spine surgery, which Alexander was like, oh my God, right?
Yeah. And at this point, it's clear that he also knows the risks. So at some point it was explained to him, my guess is from Beverly.
Yep, because fucking Dr. Russell sure as shit wasn't going to say anything.
This is going to 100% work. Or
it's not going to even hurt.
Great data.
Yeah,
it's not even exactly, hurt, exactly. So at this point, he at least knows the risks and he tells Alexander, he's transparent with Alexander. He's like, I'm going to do this super dangerous surgery that could make everything all better, but it could also still kill me. So I just want you to know what is happening. And I really appreciated that. I was like, okay, good. We're on it. We're in a good place now. Cause I just think it's definitely a risk worth taking if the alternative is him killing himself.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely.
If the alternative is
ending his life, then do the risky surgery, obviously. So before surgery, Worf asks Deanna to look after Alexander if something were to go wrong. His parents are elderly and can't care for him. And I was like, wow, this I think is truly the beginning of that little season 7 alternate timeline we see when Worf and Deanna are a couple, which I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, what the heck? And I still think they're not a great romantic pair, but I do see like, this is kind of the beginning of that, where it's like, wow, like he's really putting his cards on the table to show how much he trusts her and respects her. And, you know, maybe that doesn't speak too much to Worf because he's trying to foist his kid off on anybody, but like,
he's all like, Nurse Agawa, what do you think about having a kid?
What are you doing later? Yeah.
You met my kid, right? He's real great. He's great.
Cool. So, he's cool. Hey, he's a little bit of a biter, but he's fine. If this doesn't
work out, he's going to be with you for a while, like kind of forever. Is that cool? Thanks, Nurse Agawa.
But Worf initially, when Alexander came aboard, was going to send Alexander to like Klingon school, right? So like that could have been an option. But to ask Troy was like, wow. And Troy responded in a way I couldn't have, where she was like very touched and she was like, yeah, I'll do whatever I can. I would have been like, Worf, you clearly are on a lot of pain meds and haven't thought this one through. And I'm going to go ahead and say no. Anyway, But she's really sweet about it.
I think he's thought it through, and I think Troy would be the perfect person for Alexander.
She would be wonderful.
If he had to pick someone from the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And that was a really sweet and touching moment. Like, I really liked that
was
moment
a good one.
Like, and it was kind of an afterthought because Worf is like, okay, because clearly he hasn't thought about what's going to happen to Alexander at any point before this.
Ever.
But now he is. And I think this was a good call on his part. This wasn't sending him off to Klingon school. This wasn't sending him off to Uncle Kern. This wasn't sending him back to Earth with the Rashenkos. This was like, the Enterprise is now his home. I want him to stay here, which is a very big and serious and grown up decision. So I did like that scene. And okay, in the next scene, when we get into the surgery suite,
are you going to talk about the red OR scrubs again?
Yes. I mean, that's all I was going to say. I was so excited to see them again. I was like, oh, I forgot we get to see those again. The red
OR scrubs are back. I'm so excited. I'm also so excited to see Nurse Alyssa Ogawa is back. And I was like, woo! My one thing was, you guys have, first of all, the surgery scene is pretty gross, right? You've got an open spine.
I 100% and did not want to see any of that.
Nope, I didn't want to see any of it. But I was like, you guys don't have masks on?
We know that their sterilization procedures on the Enterprise
are on point, apparently.
Needed some work. Okay, we've always known this because they never cover their faces so we can see the actors and know who's who. So their sterilization procedures are just not great. At least they're wearing gloves and the gloves match their outfits. Cute. So there's that. Yeah. Usually they don't wear gloves, right? You remember when Beverly stuck that probe right into like John Doe's exposed brain, and she's like stuck it right on there.
Squishing sound. Yep,
yeah. When it was like 1 centimeter away from the skull, she could have put it on like the skin part. So like we already know they're not too up on sanitary conditions, but they were wearing gloves. So I'll give them that. As I started the surgery, like I was really excited about the costumes because I think they're so cool. And we only get to see them a few times. But then as they kept going, I was like, they're not going to show the surgery, are they? Because I don't want to see any of that. And they do kind of have a moment where it's like a curtain flowing in the breeze moment where they kind of pan away and go to a different scene. And I was like, oh, good, because I don't want to see this. But then they come back and the spine's all open. And I was like, oh, man.
I know. Oh, my God. Those two little like calipery things that Dr. Russell uses to like pick up the like actual spinal, not the column, but it's not the vertebra, but it's the spinal column that goes inside.
Yeah,
and
it's like where the spinal fluid is.
Like a 4 foot long worm. I was like, ugh, okay, I don't want to see that. So the surgery
it's like the
scene,
Trill again, right? Where you're just like, please don't show me
actually,
inserting squishy things into bodies.
Fun/disgusting fact. Oh gosh, this was the edited down version.
Oh my gosh.
They had originally proposed, the writers had originally proposed to have like these little tiny living organisms that they were going to like put on the open spine. And those little things were going to like eat away all the damaged material. And then like, it's like putting cockroaches all over him and having, I was like, dear God. So it's what it was. And I'm actually grateful it wasn't worse. And I do like that when they have the cutaway scenes, we see Riker and Picard just having like a standard first officer captain meeting to just kind of go over, action items for the day or for the week. And Troy and Alexander are playing a game. And there's just such a tension where they're like, have we heard anything? Have we heard anything? Seems like it takes hours. And they finally close him up and take him off.
I think it was like 27 hours or something. Isn't that what Nurse Ogawa said at the beginning? Like, we have this long before the brain completely dies because we have to sever the spinal column from the brain.
Some huge amount of time. Yeah.
But then when we come back from the cutaway moment, it's like 1 hour left. And then we have another cutaway and then it's like 30 minutes left. So thankfully they cut out all of that time of seeing gross stuff. So
yes. Well, they close him up and they're like, okay, let's take him off of life support and see how he does. And things start going wrong really quickly. And he goes into cardiac arrest and he totally flatlines. And Dr. Crusher is like, cortical stimulators, and 25 cc's of this drug. And Dr. Russell's like, that will kill him. And she's like, well, we've done a pretty good job of that already. He's already flatlining and that doesn't work. So she says cortical stimulators. And you see him get zapped. And it's just like in all the movies where like the patient like kind of bounces a little bit and then nothing. And she goes, again. And we've seen Dr. Crusher do this before. I don't remember exactly where, but it seems very familiar.
Maybe Tasha or something.
Probably. I think it was Tasha Yar. That was my initial thought also. But I was like, wait, wasn't she pronounced dead on the planet? But I think
she was. And when they brought her back, they were like, there's still a chance. And they were like,
we can bring her back.
Not really a chance, Beverly. And she was like, again. And it was like,
yes. Okay. Even knowing how this ends, I started crying because Beverly has to go inform Alexander that his father has died. And I was like, oh my God. And Alexander's fallen asleep in Counselor Troy's lap, and they're clearly sitting like right outside of sick bay
in
or
the
like
waiting room or whatever.
Yeah, in the waiting room of sick bay or something. And when Dr. Crusher walks in and there's tears down her face, Troy takes one look at her and she goes, no. And I was like, like, it was so emotional. Like, I'm literally tearing up now thinking about that. And maybe because I've lost my father, where it's like, I know what that's like, but it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have too. And I was just a little bit older than Alexander at the time. Yeah. And it was really emotional for me as well. And I think just like seeing Beverly, like, she's in tears and she's like, okay, listen, Alexander. It just felt, again, it made me so angry at Dr. Russell, just because like you are seeing people as like lab rats,
like vehicles for stardom.
He's a real person with family. He's got a son waiting outside who wants to see him again. And Beverly is the one who has to deliver this news. And she's also the one who has to deal with the fallout forevermore of losing one of her friends, fellow officers, and dealing with her son's potential backlash of blaming her for, his father not being alive for the rest of his life. Like there's a lot of fallout from this decision. And it just upsets me that Dr. Russell is disconnected from her effect on people.
Yes.
It just really, I want her to feel something, and she just doesn't. And so
yeah, it speaks to extreme narcissism. It's also, look at the good that I'm doing for mankind, but the damage that you're doing to man. Yeah. It is, I remember reading years ago, before my dad passed of cancer, how there was some cancer treatment that was this like aggressive new fancy, headline making kind of cancer treatment that they were trying out. And they tried it out on a patient, and the doctor came to a press conference to basically say that the treatment was a success and the patient died. Well, it's like the patient died, but the good news is the treatment seemed like it was really working, but the patient was just too far along or something for it to undo all the or whatever. And that's exactly what it looks like. It's like, it doesn't matter to you that the person has died, because you're out here thinking you're going to save the masses and the accolades you're going to get from this. And that person whose life you just discounted just that easily has a family who still profoundly feels the loss of that person.
Yeah.
And it just made me so sad. And when Beverly came in and she just said, Alexander, I am so sorry. It was like, oh my God. And Alexander's like, I want to see him. And Troy's like, I don't know. And she's like, no, I want to see my father. And he comes to see his dad, who is dead on the table, and starts crying. And I started crying. And while this is all happening, I was like, oh my God, there's like 3 minutes left in this whole episode. Like,
when he died,
obviously
when he flatlined, I was like, wait, what? Like, I didn't remember that part of the episode. I was like, but then
me neither.
Wait, does he must come back because he doesn't die. But then he like flatlined and they turned off all the equipment and went and told Alexander. I was like, wait a minute. It was kind of like how I felt at the end of Endgame, Avengers Endgame, which ends with just like the good guys losing monumentally. Yeah. So that's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but it's still fun to watch. And at the end of it, it was just like, wait, what happened? And then the movie goes off and you're like, huh? And that's what was going on with this moment. I was like, wait, I don't remember this. How is it? What's going on? And then, when Beverly calls the time of death and Dr. Russell's just like, I don't understand. Everything was going so well. Everything was so flawless. Everything looked like it was going really well. And Beverly just kind of rolls her eyes and walks away. I thought to myself, the only words that should be coming out of your mouth right now is, I am so sorry. That's all you should be saying. And that's the one thing you're not saying. And that's the one thing that Beverly has to turn around and go and say.
That was exactly what I thought as well. Because Dr. Russell started doing the justification thing.
Yes. But it was all going so well.
I thought, this speaks to the narcissism. You don't take responsibility for yourself. You start ticking off all the reasons why this shouldn't have happened. And it's like, but it did.
Right.
And that conversation would have been an appropriate conversation to have in a debrief 1 week from now.
Yes.
To go,
not right now over
I
his body.
just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everything was going so well. I don't understand how this happened, but his body is not even cold yet, lady. Right? So
No
as
remorse.
Alexander, of course not. As Alexander is crying, apparently Worf's redundancies, he even had like a secondary like synaptic nerve response system or something, and that kicks in and he starts like breathing, and they're like, oh my god, turn everything back on, let's get him back connected or whatever.
Beverly's like 25 cc's of whatever.
Yes.
Push the button, turn it on, lock it up. And everyone's like, wait, what? What's going on?
Full on, like, tears down my face. And like, Worf is cool and all, like, he's not my favorite character, like, he's fine, but like, this was well done. It really like told that story, and it kind of flashes forward in time where Dr. Russell's basically coming to like say goodbye, and she's like, you know, after all this time, you still can't admit that like I saved his life, like look what I did for him. And Beverly isn't even looking up from her paperwork. She's like, beep, 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 beep. He's a little beeping background sound. She's got her data pads. She's doing some homework.
She's totally given Dr. Russell the silent treatment.
Yes.
Like, don't even talk to me ever again for any reason.
Yes.
I don't need to say goodbye. Just leave.
Just goodbye.
Just leave.
But Beverly is not having it because that narcissism just gets to be too much. And Beverly pulls a Troy. She says something very gently and very lightly, but it is super impactful. She just reams her for her recklessness, all in the name of research and accolades, and very nicely tells her to fuck off. And I was like, yep. And Dr. Russell, of course, says nothing and just is like,
she just kind of shrugs and walks away.
Okay. And just walks off.
Because even now, she hasn't done anything wrong. When she killed Worf, she didn't do anything wrong. And now that Worf miraculously, now that Worf miraculously is alive because of Worf's redundant systems.
Yeah. Not because of hers.
She's like, you're not going to give me credit. Yeah, look at what I did. And it's just like, get off my ship. And if I ever see you come on the ship again, like, you will be airlocked in a heartbeat.
You're going to need some fucking redundant systems, okay?
Yeah, like, oh my gosh. So that scene was really powerful. And again, Beverly gives this really good speech. Okay, if you are listening to this episode and you have not seen this episode, like, go back and watch it. It's
so good.
It is worth watching. And if for no other reason than these really poignant speeches that happen throughout it are so good. So Beverly just delivers this amazing speech. And as a scientist myself, as a trained scientist myself, and Andrea is also a trained scientist, I can relate to all of the stuff that she was saying about research takes time, sometimes a lifetime before it's to be done properly. And there is no shortcutting and speeding through and using your patients as guinea pigs and gambling with their life just so you can get your research advanced a little bit faster. That's not how this works. That's because the point is to make people better.
She says this line that kills me, and I'm paraphrasing because I did not write it down, but it was something along the lines of, you're cutting corners
through living tissue.
Through living tissue. And it was like, wow, whoever wrote that line, kudos to you. Absolutely genius. And Dr. Russell had literally nothing that she could say to counter that, because Beverly was 1000% right. And even Beverly says, I'm sure you're going to get tons of accolades for this, like, for having done
what you've done.
Yeah. Enjoy them. I'm not sure I could. And it was like, fuck. She was so on it. And then the last thing we see is Worf is like relearning how to walk. Because even with this procedure, he still has to relearn how to walk, and he falls down, and, Alexander jumps in to like kind of help him out, and Worf lets him help him, which is a very sweet little moment. And
it's so cute because what can this little 6-year-old do? Nothing. But he comes and puts his little hands on Worf's hands, and Worf's like, yeah, that really helped. We're going to do this.
Yes, I thought the same thing too. Worf was kind of learning how to walk on that sort of the two parallel bars to help himself up. He stumbled. Alexander ran over and just placed his little itty bitty hands on top of Worf's hands, and then Worf stood up and kept walking. And I was like, I think he just needed some emotional help, maybe, because he sure as shit wasn't given the physical help. But he's also like 5, or 6 or whatever. But it was very, very sweet. What were your final thoughts on this episode, Shereese?
My final thoughts were that this episode was not as bad as I remember. And again, I didn't remember much about it. I just remembered back injury, ritual suicide, period.
Yes,
like,
that was
that's
it.
all I remembered.
Too. Me too.
There was so much more going on here. And I cannot believe I forgot this plot of the unethical doctor, which is what the episode was about. It was really about that, and sort of about Worf. And some other people got hurt, and who cares? So yeah, overall, I think it was a really, really interesting topic. And what I loved about this episode is I really enjoyed the relationships between the crew. Like, I love the world building of crew relationships. Just how does Troy relate to Worf and Picard relate to Riker? And like, I really love that. What about you? What were your final thoughts?
I thought this episode was so good. And this is one of these added bonuses of doing this podcast with you. We started the show because we love Star Trek, but there are episodes that we don't love and ones that we love more. But what's really lovely is because we have to watch them all, we get those great surprises where we're like, I didn't like that episode. And you watch it and you're like, wow, this is actually so good. It was way more emotional than I thought it would be. I also really, really like I really like this little touch that is present on Star Trek. It's nice to see that they don't always just have like a wave the magic 24th century wand around and make everything perfect. Like, your head has popped off in this accident. We'll have it reattached and it'll be up and running in 4 hours. It's like,
which we do get at the end of this season.
Really? Is there a decapitation? Oh God. Yes. Oh, the Data one. Okay. It's Data. That's different. But, it's not, we always think that like medicine is so, futuristic.
It's going to fix everything.
It's going to fix
everything. And we'll have no diseases. Why do we even have doctors?
21st century, yes, by the 21st century, there won't be any need for doctors at all because everything will be all done. It's like, no. So when she says you have sustained major damage to your spine, you won't walk again. And even when she says, you know what, after a few days of research, we have this idea that might work, but even still, it's going to be a very slow and painful process. You're not going to be anywhere back to where you were before. Thank you. Thank you for introducing that like more human, realistic, like no matter how advanced science and medicine is going to get, you won't be able to find a cure for everything. And I really, really like that. Like, I feel like the waving the magic wand is very lazy writing. And I love that they didn't do this here.
I agree, because we sometimes think about that with medical stuff that happens on the show where we're like, oh, they still have viruses. Oh, they still have this. They still have that. But like, of course, if humans evolve, microbes evolve a billion times faster. So it makes a lot of sense. Plus, you're going to alien worlds and planets and new species. So there should be all kinds of germs and things that happen. But You're right. I completely agree. It's humanizing to see that all problems are not solved just because of future, just because of technology, just because
of future. Yes.
Like, we still have social injustices. We still have physical challenges that cannot be magicked away. We still have the problems. They're still there, which is, it is refreshing. And it's what makes the show relatable.
I think so too. Well, Shereese, this has been super duper fun to talk to you about. And to nerd out with you over. Guys, next week we are talking season 5, episode 17, The Outcast. Thank you so much for nerding out with us. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.